The imperial palace of Zephyria Prime gleamed like a jewel against the crimson sunset, its crystalline spires reaching toward the twin moons that hung in the alien sky. Emperor Valdris the Magnificent sat upon his throne of living metal, which shifted and flowed beneath him like mercury, responding to his every mood. The throne room itself was a marvel of alien architecture, with walls that seemed to breathe and floors that rippled with bioluminescent patterns. Today was the day of the Great Choosing, an ancient ceremony that occurred once every 1,000 cycles. Representatives from across the galaxy had come to present their finest specimens, their most prized creatures, hoping to earn the Emperor's favor and a place in his legendary menagerie. The Emperor's collection was renowned throughout known space, housing the most beautiful, the most deadly, and the most exotic creatures from 10,000 worlds. The first delegation approached, their ceremonial robes trailing behind them as they moved with practiced grace. They were the crystalline hegemony, beings of living diamond whose faceted bodies caught and refracted the throne room's ethereal light into dancing rainbows. Their offering floated in a containment field between them, a creature of impossible beauty that seemed to be made of pure starlight, its form shifting between solid and energy with each breath. "Magnificent Emperor," spoke their leader, her voice like the tinkling of wind chimes. "We present the stellar phoenix, born in the heart of a dying star and raised in the void between galaxies. Its song can calm the most savage beast, and its light can heal any wound." Emperor Valdris leaned forward, his elongated features showing interest. His skin had the texture of polished obsidian, marked with intricate silver patterns that indicated his royal lineage among his people. His eyes, large and multifaceted like those of an insect, examined the creature with practiced assessment. After a long moment, he nodded slowly. "Beautiful," he murmured, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had ruled for 3 millennia. "I accept this gift. The stellar phoenix will have a place of honor in my collection." The crystalline beings bowed deeply, their relief palpable. To be chosen meant trade agreements, protection, and prestige for their entire civilization. Next came the void swimmers, aquatic beings who floated in mechanical suits filled with their native methane seas. Their offering was equally impressive, a creature that looked like a living galaxy, with spiral arms of glowing gas rotating around a central core. The Emperor accepted this gift as well, as he did the next dozen presentations. Each creature was more wondrous than the last, each more beautiful, more perfect. Then came an unexpected delegation that caused murmurs throughout the vast throne room. They were not representatives of some great galactic power or ancient civilization. Instead, they appear to be a mixture of species, clearly spacers or traders of some kind. At their head walked a being that immediately caught attention, not for its beauty, but for its sheer alienness even among this diverse gathering. The creature was massive, easily twice the height of the Emperor himself, with a long, serpentine neck that curved and twisted as it moved. Its hide was a patchwork of scales in varying shades of brown, green, and bronze, many of them scarred and dulled with age. Some scales were missing entirely, revealing pink skin beneath. Its eyes were large and golden, holding an intelligence that was unmistakable, but its face was asymmetrical, with one side bearing what looked like old burn scars. One of its great wings was torn, the membrane patched with what appeared to be crude repairs. The other wing dragged slightly, clearly damaged beyond full function. Behind this creature walked its companions, an odd group, if ever there was one. There was a tall, pale humanoid with only 2 arms and 2 legs, wearing simple coveralls stained with grease and oil. His hair was dark and unkempt, and his face bore the weathered look of someone who worked with his hands. Beside him walked a small, furry being with large ears and quick, nervous movements, followed by what appeared to be a sentient plant creature whose roots serve as legs. The delegation approached the throne with none of the ceremonial grace of the previous groups. The great scarred creature moved with a pronounced limp, its damaged wings scraping against the floor with each step. The sound echoed through the suddenly quiet throne room like fingernails on metal. When they reached the designated distance from the throne, the humanoid stepped forward. His movements were direct and unpracticed in court etiquette, but there was a dignity in his bearing that commanded attention. "Your Imperial Majesty," he said, his voice carrying a slight accent that marked him as coming from the Outer Rim territories. "My name is Jake Morrison, and I'm a mechanic from the independent trading vessel Lucky Strike. We've traveled far to bring you a gift that we believe is truly unique." He gestured toward the great scarred creature beside him. "This is Torek. He's the last of the great dragons of Kepler, 442b, a world that was destroyed in the war between the hegemony and the consortium 20 years ago. He's been my companion and friend for the last 5 years." The Emperor's multifaceted eyes focused on the dragon, and immediately his expression changed. Where there had been interest and appreciation for the previous offerings, now there was clear distaste. His elegant features twisted into something approaching disgust as he took in the creature's battered appearance. "This," the Emperor said, his voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber, "is what you dare to present to me? This scarred, broken thing? Look at it." He rose from his throne, the living metal flowing with his movement. Its hide is a patchwork of damage. Its wings are torn beyond repair. Its face is disfigured by battle scars. And you have the audacity to present this ugly, broken creature to me? The throne room fell silent, except for the soft humming of the various technological systems that kept the massive structure functioning. The other delegates watched with a mixture of shock and fascination. Never had anyone seen the Emperor react with such obvious revulsion. Jake's face flushed red, but he stood his ground. "Your Majesty, if you would just give Torek a chance to show you what he's capable of." Silence. The Emperor's voice cracked like a whip. "I have seen enough. I collect only the most beautiful, the most perfect specimens in the galaxy. I will not sully my menagerie with this broken thing. Take it away from my sight immediately." The great dragon, Torek, had remained silent throughout this exchange, but now his golden eyes dimmed with what could only be described as hurt and resignation. He had clearly understood every word, and the pain of rejection was evident in the way his great head lowered and his shoulders sagged. Jake's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "You're making a mistake, Your Majesty. Torek is enough." The Emperor gestured sharply, and immediately his guards began to advance. They were sleek, cybernetic beings with multiple arms and weapons built into their bodies. "Remove these traitors from my presence, and ensure that they understand they're no longer welcome in my empire." The furry creature tugged at Jake's sleeve, chittering something in a language that sounded like rapid clicks and whistles. The plant being rustled its leaves in what was clearly agitation. But Jake stood firm for a moment longer, looking directly at the Emperor with an expression of barely controlled anger. "Your Majesty sees only what's on the surface," Jake said, his voice steady despite his obvious emotion. "Where I come from, we judge beings by what's inside them, by their actions and their hearts. Torek has saved my life more times than I can count. He's brave, intelligent, loyal, and kind. If you can't see past his scars to recognize that, then maybe your famous collection isn't as valuable as everyone thinks." The intake of breath from the assembled delegates was audible. No one spoke to the Emperor like that. No one challenged his judgment, especially not some grease-stained mechanic from the Rim worlds. The Emperor's eyes blazed with fury, and the silver patterns on his skin began to glow with an ominous light. "How dare you?" Guards arrest these, but before he could finish his command, something extraordinary happened. The stellar phoenix, the beautiful creature of starlight that had been the first gift accepted that day, suddenly began to sing. Its voice was hauntingly beautiful, a melody that seemed to reach into the very soul of everyone present. But as it sang, it moved toward the great scar dragon, circling around Torek with movements that seemed almost like a dance. Other creatures in the throne room began to respond. The galaxy creature from the Void Swimmers pulsed with brighter light. A crystalline bird from another delegation began to harmonize with the phoenix's song. One by one, the magnificent creatures that the Emperor had just accepted into his collection turned their attention to the broken dragon, and their behavior was not one of revulsion or fear, but of recognition and respect. Torek lifted his great head, and for a moment, despite his scars and damage, there was something magnificent about him. His golden eyes met those of each creature in turn, and somehow, in that wordless communication, something passed between them that the assembled beings could sense but not fully understand. The Emperor stared in shock as his newly acquired creatures, the most beautiful and perfect specimens he had ever seen, all showed clear preference for the company of the Scar Dragon over their intended places in his collection. Jake watched this display with a sad smile. He placed a gentle hand on Torek's scarred flank and spoke softly, but his words carried in the stunned silence of the throne room. "It's all right, old friend. They can see what I see in you, even if he can't. We don't need his approval. We never did." The Emperor's voice was tight with barely controlled rage when he finally spoke again. "Take them away, now, and see that they are banned from all Imperial worlds." As the guards moved forward, Jake and his small group began to withdraw, with Torek moving slowly beside them. But as they turned to leave, Jake paused and looked back at the Emperor one final time. "You know what, Your Majesty? Where I come from, we have a saying, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. But we also believe that true beauty comes from within. Your collection might be the most magnificent in the galaxy, but I wouldn't trade my scarred, broken friend for all of it." With that, the small group made their way toward the great doors of the throne room. Torek's damaged wings scraped against the floor with each step, the sound somehow more dignified now than pathetic. The other creatures continued to watch them go, and several actually moved as if to follow before their handlers restrained them. As the great doors closed behind them, the throne room remained in stunned silence for a long moment. The Emperor slowly settled back onto his throne, but his usual composure was shaken. The other delegates began to murmur among themselves, uncertain how to proceed after such an unprecedented scene. Outside the throne room, Jake and his companions made their way through the crystalline corridors of the palace. The furry creature, whose name was Pip, chattered nervously as they walked. "Jake, friend," Pip said in heavily accented standard, "maybe not so good idea to make angry the Emperor being. Very powerful, very vengeful. Could make much trouble for us." The plant creature, called Moss by his friends, rustled in agreement. His communication was through chemical releases that their universal translators converted to words. "Moss agrees with Pip, friend. Emperor being has long reach, many ships, many weapons." Jake sighed, his anger cooling into weariness. "I know, guys. I know. But I couldn't just stand there and let him talk about Torek like that. Some things are more important than staying out of trouble." Torek's great head turned toward Jake, and those golden eyes held a warmth that seemed to contradict everything the Emperor had said about the dragon's ugliness. When he spoke, his voice was deep and resonant, with a musical quality that seemed to make the very air vibrate. "Jake, friend, speaks truth with courage," Torek said, his standard precise despite the accent that marked him as a native speaker of the ancient dragon tongue. "Torek is grateful for defense, though not necessary." Torek has heard such words before, from many beings who see only scars and damage. "Well, they're wrong," Jake said firmly. "Every single one of them. You're the finest being I've ever known, scars and all." As they made their way toward the palace's exit, none of them noticed the figure that had been following them through the corridors. She was tall and graceful, with the pale blue skin and elongated features of a Zephyrian noble, but her clothing marked her as someone of importance in the imperial household. She had watched the entire scene in the throne room from a hidden alcove, and now she observed the small group with intense curiosity. Princess Larelii was the Emperor's daughter, though few knew of her existence. She had been born with a genetic condition that the Emperor considered a flaw, an imperfection that could not be allowed to reflect on the imperial bloodline. As a result, she had been hidden away in the palace, her existence known only to a select few. She spent her time in the vast libraries of the palace, studying the cultures and histories of the galaxy's countless species. She had been particularly interested in the ancient legends of the dragons of Kepler, 442b, and she recognized immediately that the scarred creature was indeed one of the legendary great dragons. But, more than that, she had been struck by the loyalty and courage shown by the human mechanic, and by the dignity with which the dragon had accepted the Emperor's rejection. As the group reached the main entrance to the palace, Princess Lyralii made a decision that would change everything. She stepped out from behind a pillar and approached them, her movements graceful despite her obvious nervousness. "Please," she said softly, "wait." Jake and his companions turned, immediately recognizing her imperial bearing despite her simple clothing. They began to bow, but she waved them to stop. "No need for ceremony," she said quickly, glancing around to make sure they were not observed. "My name is Lyralii. I watched what happened in the throne room. I wanted to speak with you before you left." Jake looked puzzled. "Ma'am, we don't want to cause any more trouble. We're just trying to leave peacefully." Lyralii shook her head. "You don't understand. What you said in there, about true beauty coming from within. I've studied the ancient texts about the dragons of Kepler, 442b. I know what they were capable of, what they meant to the galaxy before the war destroyed their world." She looked directly at Torek, and there was no disgust or revulsion in her gaze, only wonder and respect. "You are a great dragon, aren't you? One of the keepers of the ancient wisdom." Torek's golden eyes widened slightly, and he inclined his great head in acknowledgement. Princess sees truly. Torek was indeed a keeper before the burning of the homeworld. Now Torek is only the last of his kind, companion to Jake, friend, and seeker of new purpose. Not just companion, Jake interjected. Friend, partner, family. Lyralii smiled, and for the first time in the conversation, her nervousness seemed to fade. "That's what I wanted to talk to you about. The Emperor sees only surface beauty, but there are others in this galaxy who value different things. Would you be willing to accept an alternative to exile from the Empire?" Jake looked suspicious. "What kind of alternative?" "There are worlds in the outer territories beyond the Emperor's direct control, where beings like Torek would be welcomed and valued for what they truly are. I have contacts there, people who could help you find a place where Torek's wisdom and knowledge would be appreciated." She paused, looking around again to make sure they were not being observed. "More than that, there are others like you, Jake. Humans who have found their way to this part of the galaxy and made lives here. They have a settlement on a world called Haven's Rest, where they welcome all species and judge beings by their actions rather than their appearance." The offer hung in the air between them, full of possibility and hope. Jake looked at his companions, seeing interest and excitement in their expressions. But it was Torek's reaction that mattered most to him. The great dragon considered for a long moment, his ancient mind weighing possibilities and consequences. Finally, he spoke. "Princess offers gift of hope," Torek said slowly. "Torek has wandered long since the burning of the homeworld, seeking place where the ancient knowledge might be preserved and shared. Perhaps this Haven's Rest might be such a place." Jake felt a weight lift from his shoulders that he hadn't even realized he'd been carrying. The prospect of finding a real home, a place where they would all be welcome, was more appealing than he wanted to admit. "Why would you help us?" he asked Lyralii directly. "Your imperial nobility. Why risk helping some outcast your father just banished?" Lyralii's expression grew sad for a moment. "Because I know what it's like to be judged for things you cannot control. And because I believe that true strength comes from standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult." She handed Jake a small device, crystalline and warm to the touch. "This contains star charts and contact information for Haven's Rest, as well as letters of introduction to some people who can help you. Tell them that Lyralii sent you." As she turned to go, Jay called after her. Princess, why are you really doing this? What do you get out of helping us? She paused and looked back, and Jake could see something in her eyes that he recognized from looking in mirrors after particularly difficult days. Maybe someday I'll have the courage to follow your example, she said quietly. Maybe someday I'll be brave enough to stand up to him the way you did. With that, she disappeared back into the corridors of the palace, leaving Jake and his friends standing in the entrance hall with new hope and a new destination. As they made their way back to their ship, Jake couldn't help but smile despite everything that had happened. The Emperor might have rejected Torek for his scars and damage, but those same scars told the story of a life lived with courage and purpose. And now, thanks to an unexpected ally, they had the chance to find a place where that story would be valued rather than scorned. The Lucky Strike was waiting for them in the palace's landing bay, her hull patched and repaired in a dozen places, her lines showing the wear of countless journeys through space. She was no beauty by conventional standards, but she was home, and she had brought them safely through adventures that would have destroyed a more fragile vessel. As they prepared for departure, Jake stood in the cargo bay with Torek, looking out through the great doors at the gleaming spires of the Imperial Palace. "Ready for another adventure, old friend?" he asked. Torek's golden eyes reflected the lights of the palace one final time before turning toward the stars visible through the bay doors. "Torek is always ready for new journey with Jake friend," the dragon replied. "Perhaps this time, journey leads to place where old songs can be sung and ancient wisdom can find new purpose." The Lucky Strike lifted off smoothly, carrying its crew away from the crystalline palace and toward an uncertain but hopeful future among the stars. 3 weeks after leaving the crystalline palace of Zephyria Prime, the Lucky Strike dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of an unremarkable star system in the Outer Rim territories. Jake Morrison stood on the bridge, studying the star charts that Princess Lyrelii had given them, while his companions gathered around the main display screen. "According to these coordinates," Jake said, adjusting the ship's sensors, Haven's Rest should be the 3rd planet from the star. "But I'm not picking up much on the scans." Pip, their furry companion, chattered nervously as he worked the communication console with his small, nimble fingers. "Pip is detecting some signals, Jake friend, but very faint. Maybe planet beings are being careful about who they let find them." Moss rustled his leaves in what they had learned was his version of agreement. Through the chemical translators, his thoughts came across as words. Wise for hidden settlement to remain hidden. Many in Galaxy would not approve of place where all species welcome. Torek lay coiled in the large open space that served as his quarters, but his great head was lifted toward the main screen. His golden eyes studied the distant planet with ancient wisdom and patience. "Torek senses something," he said in his deep, musical voice. "There is life there, much life, and something else, something that calls to the old memories." Jake trusted Torek's senses more than his ship's instruments. The dragon had abilities that technology couldn't match, connections to the galaxy that went deeper than electronic signals and energy readings. "All right, let's take her in slowly. If this really is a sanctuary for refugees and outcasts, they're probably not too eager to have uninvited guests." As the Lucky Strike approached the planet, more details became visible. Haven's Rest was a world of deep blue oceans and green continents, with swirling white clouds that spoke of an active weather system and a healthy atmosphere. But what caught their attention were the structures in orbit around the planet. Instead of the sleek, uniform design of most spacefaring civilizations, the orbital stations around Haven's Rest were a patchwork of different technologies and architectural styles. Jake could identify hull plating from at least a dozen different species, energy signatures that belonged to various periods of galactic history, and docking bays that had been modified to accommodate everything from tiny personal craft to massive cargo haulers. "It looks like a junkyard," Pip observed, but there was wonder rather than criticism in his voice. "No," Jake said, studying the structures more carefully. "It looks like home. Look how everything fits together. It's not random. Someone designed this to work with what they had, to make use of every piece, every component. It's beautiful in its own way. Their conversation was interrupted by an incoming communication signal. The voice that came through their speakers was warm and welcoming, with the accent of someone who had grown up speaking multiple languages. Unknown vessel. This is Haven's Rest Traffic Control. I am Commander Sarachen. Please state your name and purpose for visiting our system. Jake activated the communication array. This is Jake Morrison, captain of the independent trader Lucky Strike. We were told that Haven's Rest might be a place where we could find sanctuary. We have letters of introduction from Princess Lorelei of Zephyria Prime. There was a pause, during which Jake could hear muffled conversations in the background. When Commander Chun came back on the line, her tone had shifted to something warmer and more personal. Princess Lorelei, you said? Well, that's a name we haven't heard in a while. Any friend of hers is welcome here, Captain Morrison. Please transmit your identification codes and stand by for docking instructions. As they waited, Jake found himself nervous in a way he hadn't been since he was a young man, taking his first job as a ship's engineer. This wasn't just about finding a place to dock or trade goods. This was about finding a home, a place where his unusual family might truly belong. The docking bay they were assigned to was in one of the larger orbital stations, a structure that looked like it had been built by combining the hulks of several different ship designs. As they approached, Jake could see through the transparent sections of the docking bay that there were beings of dozens of different species working together on various tasks. The atmosphere in the bay was warm and slightly humid, with the scent of growing things mixed with the metallic smell of machinery and the ozone tang of energy systems. As soon as the Lucky Strike settled onto the docking platform, Jake could see a small group approaching their ship. The woman leading the group was clearly Commander Chun, a human of middle age with graying hair pulled back in a practical style and clothes that showed the wear of someone who worked with her hands. Beside her walked a tall, thin being with crystalline skin similar to the hegemony delegates they had seen at the Emperor's court. But this one's movements were more relaxed, less formal. Behind them came a stocky humanoid with blue-green skin and what appeared to be gills along his neck, and bringing up the rear was a floating sphere of energy that pulsed with different colors as it moved. Jake activated the cargo bay doors and stepped out to meet them, followed by Pip and Moss. Torek remained inside for the moment, knowing that his appearance often caused alarm until people had a chance to adjust to him. Captain Morrison, Commander Chin said, extending her hand in the human gesture of greeting. Welcome to Haven's Rest. I'm Sarah Chun, and these are my associates. Crix Tal is our chief engineer. She indicated the crystalline being. Guldar handles security and customs. The blue-green humanoid nodded. And Lumina here is our AI liaison and traffic coordinator. The energy sphere pulsed brighter and emitted a sound like musical chimes. Jake shook hands with Commander Chun and nodded respectfully to the others. Thank you for the welcome. I have to say, this isn't what I was expecting. What were you expecting? Crix Tal asked, her voice carrying the same crystal chime quality as the hegemony delegates, but with a much warmer tone. I guess I thought a refugee settlement would be more desperate, more makeshift. This looks like a thriving community. Commander Chin laughed, a sound that reminded Jake of his sister back on Earth. Oh, we started out desperate and makeshift, believe me. But that was 15 years ago. We've learned a lot since then about turning desperation into determination and makeshift into innovative. She gestured around them at the bustling activity in the docking bay. Haven's Rest was founded by a group of beings who had been displaced by various conflicts and political situations throughout the galaxy. Refugees, exiles, people who didn't fit into the neat categories that the major powers preferred. We figured if nobody else wanted us, we'd make our own place. And it worked. Jake asked. Better than anyone dared to hope, Guldar rumbled, his voice deep and bubbling like water over stones. Now we have 30,000 inhabitants across 5 orbital stations and 3 surface colonies. We're completely self-sufficient and actually trade with over 100 systems. Lumina's musical voice chimed in. The key was recognizing that diversity is a strength, not a weakness. When you have beings from hundreds of different worlds working together, you get solutions that none of them could have found alone. Jake felt a warmth spreading through his chest that had nothing to do with the atmospheric controls. This really was what he had hoped to find. I should mention, I'm not traveling alone. I have 3 companions, and one of them might be challenging for some people to accept. Commander Chin's expression grew serious, but not unfriendly. What kind of challenging are we talking about, Captain? We've seen a lot of different beings here, and we've learned that appearances can be very deceiving. My friend Torek is a great dragon from Kepler, 442b, the last of his kind. He's been through a lot, and he bears the scars of it. The Emperor of Zephyria rejected him because of his appearance. The reaction from the welcoming committee was immediate and unanimous. Instead of the fear or disgust that Jake had learned to expect, their expressions showed excitement and wonder. A great dragon? Crixtal whispered, her crystalline features actually glowing brighter with excitement. Here, a real keeper of the ancient wisdom. Commander Chun turned to Jake with an expression of amazement. Captain Morrison, do you have any idea how incredibly honored we would be to have a great dragon among our community? The dragons were legendary for their knowledge, their wisdom, their dedication to preserving the cultures and histories of countless worlds. Jake felt a huge weight lift from his shoulders. You mean it? You'd really welcome him? Even though he's scarred and damaged from the war? Especially because he's scarred and damaged from the war, Guldar said firmly. Those scars mean he's a survivor. They mean he's seen the worst the galaxy has to offer and chosen to keep going anyway. That's exactly the kind of being we want in our community. Lumina pulsed with warm golden light. The dragons were known throughout the galaxy for their compassion and their commitment to helping others. If he's traveled with you as a friend and companion, then he embodies everything Haven's Rest stands for. Jake felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes. After years of seeing people react to Torek with fear or disgust, having these strangers welcome him with such enthusiasm was almost overwhelming. Would you like to meet him? Jake asked. The entire group nodded eagerly, and Jake activated the internal communicator. Torek, my friend, would you like to come out and meet our hosts? There was a moment of silence, then the sound of heavy footsteps approaching. Torek emerged from the cargo bay slowly, his damaged wings scraping against the deck plating, his scarred head held high despite the pain that Jake knew each movement caused him. When the welcoming committee saw him, there was a moment of awed silence. Jake tensed, ready to defend his friend again if necessary. But the reaction that came was nothing like what he had expected. Commander Chin stepped forward first, and her movement was one of profound respect. She placed her hand over her heart and bowed deeply, a gesture that Jake recognized as an ancient form of honor rarely seen in the modern galaxy. Great Keeper, she said formally, we are honored beyond words by your presence. Haven's Rest welcomes you not just as a refugee or guest, but as a teacher and guide if you are willing to share your wisdom with us. Crixtal, Guldar, and Lumina all made similar gestures of respect in the traditions of their own species. Torek's golden eyes widened with surprise, and Jake could see the emotional impact that this reception was having on his friend. You honor Torek far beyond his worth, the dragon said, his musical voice carrying a tremor of emotion. Torek is no longer the proud keeper he once was. He is broken, scarred, the last of his kind with no wisdom worth sharing. That's where you're wrong, my friend, Commander Chin said gently. The greatest wisdom often comes from those who have experienced the greatest pain and chosen to remain kind anyway. Your scars don't diminish your worth. They prove it. She gestured around them at the diverse group of beings working in the docking bay. Every person in this community has scars of one kind or another. Physical, emotional, spiritual. We don't hide them here. We honor them as proof that we've survived, that we've overcome, that we've chosen to keep going despite everything the galaxy has thrown at us. Crixtal stepped forward, her crystalline features reflecting the light in beautiful patterns. Great Keeper, if I may ask, what is your knowledge of crystal song harmonics? My people have lost much of the ancient knowledge due to the wars, and the elders speak of dragons who once helped preserve our cultural heritage. Toric's scarred features brightened with interest. Toric remembers the crystal singers of the hegemony worlds, beautiful voices that could heal broken stone and sing new growth into damaged crystals. Would Crixtal like to learn the old harmonies? The crystalline being practically glowed with excitement. I would be honored beyond measure. Great Keeper. Guldar stepped forward as well. And if the Great Keeper knows anything of the old waterways, the navigation songs of my people, I would be grateful for any guidance. Many of the traditional routes were lost when our home world was relocated. Jake watched this interaction with growing amazement. In the space of a few minutes, Toric had gone from being a rejected outcast to being welcomed as a valued teacher and guide. The transformation in his friend was visible, the way his great head lifted higher, the way his golden eyes began to shine with purpose once again. Toric would be honored to share what knowledge remains, the dragon said, and Jake could hear the ancient dignity returning to his voice. Perhaps in sharing the old songs and stories, they will not be lost when Toric's time ends. Commander Chen shook her head firmly. That time is far in the future, Great Keeper. And besides, if you're willing to teach, then the knowledge won't be lost at all. It will live on in new voices, new songs, new stories. She turned to Jake with a broad smile. Captain Morrison, I think it's safe to say that you and your companions will find a very warm welcome here at Haven's Rest. Would you like a tour of our facilities? And we'll need to discuss housing arrangements and work assignments, assuming you're interested in staying permanently. Work assignments? Jake asked. Everyone contributes here according to their abilities. Lumina chimed musically. We're always in need of good mechanics and engineers, and a trader with his own ship could be invaluable for our supply runs and diplomatic missions. And a great dragon would be welcome in our archives and libraries, Crixtal added eagerly. We've been working to preserve the cultural heritage of all the species in our community. Having access to the memory of a keeper would be incredible. Pip chattered excitedly, his small form practically bouncing with enthusiasm. Pip would like to help too. Pip is good with communications and small repair work. Moss rustled his leaves, his chemical speech translating as words full of hope. Moss would enjoy working with growing things, if such work exists in this place. We have extensive hydroponic gardens and agricultural programs, Guldar assured him. Plant intelligence is always welcome in those areas. Jake looked around at his companions, seeing hope and excitement in all their faces. For the first time in years, they had found a place where they weren't just tolerated, but actually wanted. I think, Jake said slowly, that we'd very much like to call this place home. The next several hours were a whirlwind of activity. Commander Chun and her team gave them a comprehensive tour of the orbital station, showing them everything from the engineering sections where various technologies have been adapted to work together to the communal areas where beings from dozens of species socialized and shared meals together. The residential sections were particularly impressive. Instead of uniform housing units, each living space had been designed to accommodate the specific needs of its inhabitants. There were atmospheric chambers for beings who breathe methane, gravity wells for those who required different gravitational fields, and even specialized environments for energy-based life forms. The key principle here, Commander Chan explained as they walked through one of the residential corridors, is that everyone gets what they need and everyone contributes what they can. It took us a while to figure out the logistics, but now it runs pretty smoothly. They were shown to a large section that had been specially configured for Toric's needs, with high ceilings to accommodate his size and reinforced floors to handle his weight. Adjacent to this were smaller quarters that had been prepared for Jake and his other companions. How did you know to prepare this? Jake asked, gesturing to the dragon-sized accommodations. Commander Chin smiled mysteriously. Let's just say that Princess Lyreliai's message was quite detailed about your specific needs. She wanted to make sure you'd have everything necessary to feel welcome here. As evening fell over Haven's Rest, Jake found himself on an observation deck looking out at the planet below. The surface was beautiful, with lights scattered across the continents that marked the locations of the ground-based settlements. Above him, the artificial aurora created by the station's atmospheric processors painted the sky in shifting colors of blue and green. Torek joined him on the deck, his massive form settling beside Jake's chair with surprising grace despite his injuries. Together, they watched the lights of their new home twinkling in the darkness. Torek never thought to find such acceptance again, the dragon said quietly. Jake friend has given Torek gift beyond measure by bringing him to this place. Jake reached out and placed his hand on Torek's scarred flank. You're the one who gave me the gift, old friend. You showed me what real strength looks like, what real beauty is. The Emperor couldn't see it, but these people can. Perhaps, Torek mused, this is why the old song spoke of journeys and destinations. Not all who wander are lost, the dragons used to say. Sometimes the longest journey leads to the place where you were always meant to be. Jake smiled, feeling more at peace than he had in years. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new responsibilities, new adventures. But tonight, for the first time in as long as he could remember, he was truly home. In the distance, he could hear the sound of music drifting from one of the communal areas. Multiple species were contributing to the melody, creating something that was unlike any traditional song, but beautiful in its diversity and harmony. It seemed like the perfect soundtrack for their new life on Haven's Rest, where differences were celebrated rather than merely tolerated, and where an ugly, scarred dragon could be valued as the keeper of ancient wisdom that he truly was. The Emperor of Zephyria had rejected Torek for his scars and damage, seeing only what was broken and ugly. But Jake had always seen past the surface to the noble heart beneath, and now they had found an entire community that shared that vision. Sometimes the most valuable treasures are the ones that others overlook, and sometimes the most beautiful music comes from voices that don't sound like anything else in the galaxy. 6 months had passed since the Lucky Strike had docked at Haven's Rest, and the changes in both the community and its newest residents were remarkable. Jake Morrison had thrown himself into his work with the Engineering Corps, helping to maintain and improve the patchwork of technologies that kept the orbital stations running. His practical knowledge and innovative problem-solving had quickly made him indispensable to the community's infrastructure. But the most dramatic transformation had been in Torek. The Great Dragon had found new purpose in the archives of Haven's Rest, working with scholars and cultural preservationists from dozens of species to record and share the ancient knowledge that he carried in his memory. His scarred appearance, once a source of shame and rejection, had become a symbol of resilience and wisdom to the community. On this particular morning, Jake was working in Engineering Bay 7, deep in the hull of the main orbital station, when an urgent message came through the communication system. All senior staff to the command center immediately. Commander Chen's voice carried through the station with barely controlled tension. We have a situation developing. Jake wiped the grease from his hands and made his way quickly through the corridors toward the command center. Along the way, he passed other members of the community hurrying in the same direction, their expressions showing the same concern he felt. Haven's Rest had been peaceful for as long as anyone could remember, a sanctuary far from the conflicts that plagued other parts of the galaxy. The command center was a large, circular room at the heart of the station, filled with displays showing everything from local space traffic to planetary weather patterns. When Jake arrived, he found it crowded with the senior staff and community leaders. Commander Chun stood at the center of it all, her face grim as she studied the main display. "What's the situation?" asked Dr. Vexina, the station's chief medical officer, a tall humanoid with purple skin and multiple arms that allowed her to multitask in ways that amazed even the most efficient humans. Commander Chin gestured to the main screen, which showed the outer edge of their star system. "We got incoming ships. 12 vessels, military configuration, flying Imperial colors." Jake felt his stomach drop. Zephyrian Empire? That's correct. And according to our long-range sensors, they're not stopping to trade or negotiate. They're coming in fast and hot with weapons systems active. Krikstal's crystalline form chimed with distress. But the Empire has never bothered with the Outer Rim territories before. We're not even in their official star charts. There now, Commander Chun said grimly. And I think we can guess why they're suddenly interested in our little corner of space. Jake closed his eyes, knowing exactly what she meant. The Emperor, he's coming after us. After Torek. Commander Chun nodded. That would be my guess. The question is, what do we do about it? We got about 6 hours before they arrive. The room fell silent as everyone considered their options. Haven's Rest had always been a peaceful community dedicated to building and creating rather than fighting and destroying. They had defensive systems, but nothing that could stand up to a full Imperial battle group. We could evacuate, suggested Guldar. Load everyone onto the ships and scatter to different systems. Meet up later at one of the backup locations. 30,000 people. Dr. Vexina shook her head. We don't have enough transport capacity. And even if we did, where would we go? If the Empire has decided we're a threat, they'll hunt us wherever we try to settle. Maybe we should consider giving them what they want, said another voice from the back of the room. Jake turned to see who had spoken and found himself looking at Council Member Torth, an elderly humanoid whose species Jake didn't recognize. If they're only after the dragon, perhaps we could know. The word came from Jake with such force and finality that it cut through all other conversation. Absolutely not. We don't abandon our own. Period. But, Jake friend, came a familiar voice, and Jake turned to see Torek entering the command center. Despite his size, the dragon moved with surprising quiet, his damaged wing folded against his side. Perhaps Council Member Torth speaks wisdom. Torek would not see this community destroyed for his sake. And I won't see my friend handed over to that sadistic tyrant for any reason, Jake shot back. We'll find another way. Commander Chun looked around the room at the assembled faces. This is a decision the whole community needs to make together. But before we do anything, I want to know exactly what we're dealing with. Lumina, what can you tell us about the incoming fleet? The AI's energy form pulsed with rapid calculations. Scanning now, Commander. The fleet consists of 12 vessels, 3 heavy cruisers, 6 destroyers, 2 troop transports, and 1 command ship. Total complement approximately 8,000 Imperial Marines and naval personnel. They are flying the personal banner of Emperor Valdris himself. The Emperor came personally? Krikstal's voice chimed with disbelief. For one dragon? It's not about the dragon, Jake said, sudden understanding dawning on him. It's about what happened in the throne room. I humiliated him in front of the entire court, challenged his judgment, called his precious collection worthless. This isn't about capturing Torek. This is about revenge. Torek's golden eyes widened with understanding and guilt. Then, Torek has brought doom upon this place. Perhaps, stop right there, Commander Chun interrupted. Nobody brought doom on anybody. We make our own choices here, and we deal with the consequences together. That's what community means. She turned to address the room. All right, people, we have 6 hours to figure out how to protect our home and our people from a battle fleet that outguns us 50-1. I'm open to suggestions. What about the other settlements? Asked Dr. Vexina. Could we call for help from our trading partners? None of them have military capabilities that could match the Empire, Guldar pointed out. And asking for help would just put them at risk too. Jake's mind was racing, trying to think of solutions that didn't involve surrender or running. Then, suddenly, he had an idea. It was crazy, probably impossible, but it might be their only chance. What if we don't fight them? He said slowly. Everyone turned to look at him. Explain, Commander Chun said. The Emperor wants revenge for being humiliated in front of his court, right? What if we give him something even better? What if we show him that he was wrong about Torek? Not just wrong, but spectacularly, publicly wrong? Council Member Torth shook his head. How could we possibly do that? The man's convinced that beauty equals value. Nothing we say is going to change his mind. You're right, Jake said, warming to his idea. Nothing we say will change his mind. But maybe we can show him something that will. He turned to Torek. Tell me about the dragon songs. The ancient knowledge you've been sharing with our people. Could you teach them to a large group? Could you coordinate something that involved the whole community? Torek's scarred features showed confusion. Torek does not understand. Jake Friend wishes a performance for the Emperor. Not a performance, Jake said, his excitement growing. A demonstration. You told me once that the dragons were the keepers of harmony, right? That your knowledge wasn't just about preserving individual cultures, but about helping different species work together. Yes, Torek said slowly. The great dragons were mediators, teachers, bridge builders between worlds and peoples. Then, let's build a bridge, Jake said. Let's show the Emperor what real beauty looks like. Not his collection of perfect, isolated specimens, but a living example of different species working together to create something that none of them could achieve alone. Commander Chin's eyes lit up with understanding. A community harmony, like the old songs speak of, but on a massive scale. Crixtal began to glow with excitement. My people's crystal resonance could anchor the harmonic structure, and the Vorthan water singers could provide the base foundation. The photosynthetic chorus could handle the upper frequencies, added Moss through his chemical translators. Jake nodded enthusiastically. Exactly. And not just music. Everything. A coordinated effort involving every species, every talent, every ability in our community. Engineering, agriculture, art, science, all working together in perfect harmony. But, Jake Friend, Torek said, still sounding uncertain. Such an undertaking would require weeks of preparation. We have only hours. Not if we don't start from scratch, Jake said. You've been working with different groups for months, teaching them the old songs and stories. They already know pieces of what we need. We just have to put it all together. Dr. Vexina held up one of her many hands. Assuming we could pull off this massive coordination in 6 hours, what makes you think the Emperor would be impressed? He rejected Torek based on appearance alone. Because, Jake said, he's never seen anything like this before. His collection is all about individual perfection, individual beauty. He has no concept of collaborative creation. When he sees an entire community working together, each contributing their unique abilities to create something greater than the sum of its parts, he'll finally understand what real beauty looks like. And if he doesn't, ask Councilmember Torth. Jake's expression grew serious. Then, at least we'll face whatever comes together as a community. And we'll have shown Torek and everyone else here what we really believe in. Commander Chen looked around the room, seeing growing excitement and determination in the faces of her people. All right, people. We have 6 hours to pull off the most ambitious community project in the history of Haven's Rest. Jake, I'm putting you in charge of coordination. Torek will need you to teach as many people as possible, as quickly as possible. Crixtal, start working with the engineering teams on the technical aspects. Dr. Vexina, make sure our medical facilities are ready for anything. Guldar, coordinate with security to make sure we can handle 8,000 unexpected visitors. What about me? Asked Lumina. You get to handle the most important job of all, Commander Chin said with a grim smile. You get to figure out how to transmit our demonstration to every ship in that fleet simultaneously, in real time, with perfect clarity. If we're going to change the Emperor's mind, we need to make sure he can't miss what we're showing him. As the meeting broke up and people scattered to their various tasks, Jake found himself standing with Torek in the command center, both of them somewhat overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they were attempting. Jake Friend, Torek said quietly, does Jake truly believe this plan can succeed? Jake looked at his scarred, damaged friend, seeing past the physical imperfections to the wise, kind being beneath. I believe in us, Torek. I believe in what we've built here. And I believe that sometimes when you show people something beautiful enough, it changes how they see everything else. The next 6 hours were the most intense and chaotic that Haven's Rest had ever experienced. In the engineering bays, teams worked frantically to modify the station's communication and projection systems. In the residential areas, community leaders went from dwelling to dwelling, explaining the plan and recruiting volunteers. In the archives, Torek worked with scholars and artists to adapt the ancient dragon harmonies to accommodate dozens of different species and their unique abilities. Jake found himself running from section to section, troubleshooting problems, coordinating between groups, and trying to keep track of the hundreds of moving parts that had to come together perfectly for their plan to work. In Engineering Bay 3, Krixtal was working with a team of technicians to create a massive crystalline resonance array that could amplify and harmonize the various frequencies that different species use to communicate. "The crystal matrix is stable," she reported as Jake checked on their progress, "but I'm not sure if it can handle the full spectrum we're planning. Some of the energy-based life forms communicate in frequencies that could overload the system. What if we used a distributed network instead of a single array?" Jake suggested. Smaller resonance points throughout the station, each handling a specific frequency range, all coordinated by Lumina's processing systems. Krixtal's features brightened. That could work. It would be more complex to coordinate, but much safer and more reliable. In the hydroponic gardens, Moss was working with the plant-based members of the community to create a living harmony, using chemical releases and electromagnetic fields to add layers of complexity that only photosynthetic beings could achieve. "The growing song is ready," Moss reported when Jake checked on them. "All plant beings understand the rhythm and timing." "But, Jake friend, are you certain the animal speakers will be able to perceive our part of the harmony?" "That's what the translation matrix is for," Jake assured him. "Lumina has been working on algorithms to convert your chemical communications into frequencies that other species can sense. It should work." In the communal areas, groups of beings from every species in the community were practicing the complex coordination that Torek had taught them. Humans worked alongside crystalline singers, while amphibious Vorthans harmonized with energy beings from the outer nebulae. As Jake watched them work together, he felt a surge of pride and hope. This was what Haven's Rest was really about. Not just tolerance or coexistence, but true collaboration and mutual support. Each species contributed something unique, and together they were creating something that none of them could achieve alone. With 2 hours remaining before the Imperial fleet arrived, Commander Chun called for a full rehearsal. Every member of the community who was participating gathered in the main assembly area, while those who weren't took positions at the various technical stations throughout the facility. "This is it, people," Commander Chun announced over the general communication system. "One chance to get this right. Torek, you're conducting. Jake, coordinate with the technical teams. Everyone else, remember what we're trying to accomplish here. We're not just trying to save ourselves. We're trying to show the galaxy what real beauty looks like." Torek positioned himself at the center of the assembly area, his scarred form somehow transformed by the dignity of his purpose. Despite his damaged wing and battle scars, he carried himself with the ancient authority of the great dragons, the keepers of harmony. "Begin with the foundation rhythm," he called out, his musical voice carrying clearly throughout the space. The Vorthan water singers started with a deep, thrumming bass that seemed to resonate through the very structure of the station. It was joined by the crystalline chiming of Krixtal's people, then by the harmonic humming of the humans, and gradually by dozens of other voices, each adding their unique contribution to the growing symphony. But this wasn't just music. As the harmony built, the technical teams began to activate their systems. The lights throughout the station began to pulse in rhythm with the sounds, creating visual patterns that complemented the audio. The atmospheric processors started releasing carefully controlled bursts of colored gases, painting the space around the station in shifting, beautiful colors. The hydroponic gardens released clouds of bioluminescent pollen that drifted through the station's corridors like living stars. The energy beings danced through the structure, their forms creating patterns of light that matched the rhythm and melody of the great harmony. Jake watched from the Technical Coordination Center, monitoring dozens of systems and making real-time adjustments to keep everything synchronized. What he saw taking shape around him was unlike anything he had ever imagined. It wasn't just beautiful, it was alive. It was the visual and auditory representation of a community working together, each part supporting and enhancing every other part. The scars on the station's hull, the patches and repairs that showed its humble origins, somehow became part of the pattern, proof of resilience and adaptation rather than signs of weakness or poverty. As the harmony reached its crescendo, with every voice, every light, every system in the station working in perfect coordination, Jake felt tears streaming down his face. This was what he had tried to explain to the Emperor 6 months ago. This was the beauty that came from within, the value that could only be seen when you looked past the surface to understand what really mattered. Imperial fleet dropping out of hyperspace, Lumina announced, her voice somehow managing to harmonize with the ongoing symphony. Transmission incoming from the command ship. Commander Chun activated the main communication system, and suddenly, the throne room of the Imperial command ship appeared on the main screen. Emperor Valdris sat on a portable version of his living metal throne, his multifaceted eyes blazing with anger and anticipation of revenge. Citizens of Haven's Rest, the Emperor announced, his voice carrying the authority of absolute power. You are harboring a criminal who insulted the dignity of the Imperial throne. Surrender the dragon and his human companion immediately, or face the consequences of defying the Empire. Commander Chen stepped forward, the great harmony continuing around her as she replied, Your Imperial Majesty, we respectfully decline to surrender any member of our community. However, we would like to offer you something else. A gift, if you will. The Emperor's expression showed contempt. I have no interest in gift from a collection of outcasts and refugees. You have 1 minute to comply with my demands. Then, I suppose, Commander Chen said calmly, that we'll have to make our point quickly. She nodded to Jake, who activated the transmission systems that Lumina had prepared. Suddenly, every ship in the Imperial fleet was receiving a direct, real-time feed of the harmony taking place throughout Haven's Rest. The effect was immediate and dramatic. On the screens showing the Imperial ships, Jake could see crew members stopping their preparations for battle, turning to stare at displays showing the incredible coordination taking place on the station. The Emperor himself fell silent, his multifaceted eyes widening as he took in what he was seeing. The living symphony of light, sound, movement, and purpose that filled every corner of Haven's Rest was unlike anything in his vast collection of beautiful things. Behold, Your Imperial Majesty. Torik's voice carried across the transmission, his scarred features visible at the center of the harmony, the true beauty that your court rejected. Not the beauty of individual perfection, but the beauty of many different voices working together to create something that none could achieve alone. The harmony continued to build and evolve, with new layers being added constantly as different groups found new ways to contribute. The engineering systems began to resonate with the crystalline frequencies, creating structural harmonics that turned the entire station into a massive musical instrument. The agricultural systems released precisely timed bursts of aromatic compounds that added an olfactory dimension to the experience. Even the waste recycling systems found ways to contribute, creating rhythmic pulses that provided underlying structure to the whole composition. Jake watched the Emperor's face on the screen, seeing the exact moment when understanding began to dawn. The anger and contempt were slowly being replaced by wonder and confusion, as if he was seeing something that challenged everything he thought he knew about beauty and value. The transmission continued for 10 minutes, showing every aspect of the community working together in perfect harmony. When it finally concluded, with all voices joining in a final, unified note that seemed to resonate through space itself, the silence that followed was profound. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The Imperial fleet held position, neither advancing nor retreating. In the throne room of the command ship, Emperor Valdris sat motionless, his multifaceted eyes fixed on the screen showing Haven's Rest. Finally, he spoke, his voice quiet and thoughtful in a way that Jake had never heard before. This was coordinated by the dragon, the scarred one that I rejected. Torek stepped forward in the transmission, his scarred features clearly visible. Yes, Your Imperial Majesty. This is what the ancient dragons did. We were not collectors of beautiful things. We were teachers of harmony, builders of bridges between different peoples. We helped others find ways to work together, to create beauty through cooperation rather than isolation. The Emperor stared at Torek for a long moment, and Jake could see something shifting in his expression. I have never seen anything like this. In all my centuries, in all my vast collection, I have never seen beauty that was created by cooperation rather than captured and contained. He rose from his throne, his movements unsteady, as if he was struggling with concepts that challenged the foundation of his worldview. The scars, they are part of what makes this possible, aren't they? They represent experience, wisdom, the knowledge that comes from surviving difficulty and choosing to help others instead of becoming bitter. Commander Chun stepped forward in the transmission. That's exactly right, Your Imperial Majesty. Every being in our community bears scars of one kind or another. Physical, emotional, spiritual. We don't hide them or see them as flaws. We see them as proof that we've overcome challenges, that we've chosen to keep going despite everything the galaxy has thrown at us. The Emperor looked around his throne room at the perfect, isolated specimens in their containment fields, and for the first time in his long life, they seemed small and lifeless compared to what he had just witnessed. He said slowly, I believe I have made a terrible mistake. The silence that followed the Emperor's admission stretched across space like a hell breath. In the command center of Haven's Rest, Jake Morrison watched the main screen with a mixture of hope and caution. Emperor Valdris stood motionless on his throne ship, his multifaceted eyes reflecting the residual glow from the Harmony transmission that had just concluded. Commander Chun broke the silence carefully. Your Imperial Majesty, would you be willing to discuss this matter further? Perhaps we could arrange a meeting to better understand each other's perspectives? The Emperor's response came slowly, as if he was still processing what he had witnessed. Yes, I believe that would be educational. However, I cannot simply dock at your station. The security implications, we understand completely, Commander Chun interrupted gently. Might I suggest a neutral meeting space? Our main observation deck has full atmospheric controls and can accommodate various environmental needs. We could limit the meeting to a small group from each side. Jake found himself holding his breath as the Emperor considered this proposal. Everything depended on whether the proud ruler could overcome his anger and wounded pride enough to actually engage in dialogue. Very well, the Emperor said finally. I will meet with your leaders in 2 hours. But I want the dragon present, the scarred one. I have questions for him. After the transmission ended, the command center erupted in controlled chaos as the community leaders prepared for the most important diplomatic meeting in Haven's Rest's history. Jake found himself appointed as one of the small delegation, along with Commander Chun, Torek, and, surprisingly, Crixtal. Why me? Crixtal asked, her crystalline features chiming with nervous energy. Because you represent the beauty that the Emperor claims to value, Commander Chun explained, but you chose to leave that world behind for something better. He needs to understand that even those who fit his definition of perfection can see the flaws in his philosophy. As they prepared for the meeting, Jake had a private moment with Torek in the dragon's quarters. His friend was coiled in the large space, his golden eyes reflecting deep thought and old pain. Are you ready for this? Jake asked, facing him again after what he said. Torek's scarred head lifted to meet Jake's eyes. Torek has learned much in these past months. Jake friend showed Torek that scars need not be sources of shame. Perhaps now Torek can show the Emperor the same truth. He hurt you deeply with his words, Jake observed. It's okay to acknowledge that. Yes, Torek admitted. The Emperor's rejection brought back all the old pain from after the burning of the homeworld. The feeling of being broken, useless, the last of a failed people. But Jake friend and this community showed Torek that the old songs were right. The measure of a being is not in their perfection, but in how they choose to use whatever gifts they possess. Jake placed his hand on his friend's scarred flank. Those gifts have helped build something amazing here. The Emperor is about to learn that lesson himself. 2 hours later, the observation deck had been transformed into an impromptu diplomatic meeting space. The vast, transparent dome provided a stunning view of the planet below and the stars beyond, while atmosphere processors ensured perfect environmental conditions for all the species present. Emperor Valdris arrived in a small, elegant shuttle accompanied by only 3 guards. Jake was surprised to see that one of them was Princess Lorelei, though she was dressed in military uniform rather than the simple clothing she had worn when helping them escape from Zephyria Prime. The Emperor himself seemed different somehow. The absolute confidence and authority that had defined him in his throne room appeared shaken, replaced by something that might have been uncertainty or even vulnerability. As the two groups faced each other across the meeting space, Jake noticed that the Emperor's eyes kept returning to Torek, studying the dragon's scars with an expression that was no longer disgust, but something closer to curiosity. "Your Imperial Majesty," Commander Chan began formally, "thank you for agreeing to this meeting. We hope it can lead to better understanding between our peoples." The Emperor nodded slowly, his movements lacking their usual imperial precision. "Commander Chan, I must begin with an admission that is difficult for one of my position. What I witnessed today has forced me to question assumptions I have held for millennia." He turned to face Torek directly. "Great Dragon, I owe you an apology. I rejected you based solely on your appearance, without consideration for your true nature or value. That was wrong of me." Torek inclined his massive head gracefully. "Your Imperial Majesty's words honor Torek beyond measure, but apology is not necessary." The Emperor saw what Torek had been taught to see in himself. Scars and damage, proof of failure and weakness. "But that's not what they represent, is it?" the Emperor said, his voice carrying genuine curiosity. "What I saw today, the harmony your community created, it couldn't have existed without those experiences, without the wisdom that comes from suffering and choosing to continue anyway." Crixtal stepped forward, her crystalline form catching the starlight from the observation dome. "Your Imperial Majesty, may I speak freely?" The Emperor gestured for her to continue. "I was born into the crystalline hegemony, bred for the kind of perfection that your collection celebrates. My people spend centuries perfecting their forms, removing any flaw or imperfection. But when I came to Haven's Rest, I learned something that changed my perspective forever." She gestured around them at the diverse group assembled for the meeting. "True beauty isn't about individual perfection. It's about how we connect with others, how we contribute to something larger than ourselves. The scars and imperfections we carry tell the stories of our lives, of the challenges we've overcome, of the lessons we've learned." The Emperor listened intently, his multifaceted eyes reflecting the changing lights of the planet below. "But surely perfection has value. The harmony I witnessed, it was beautiful precisely because it was coordinated precisely because each element worked perfectly with the others." "Exactly," Jake interjected. "But that perfection came from different beings working together, each contributing their unique abilities and perspectives. It wasn't about individual flawlessness. It was about collaborative excellence." Princess Lorelei spoke for the first time since entering the observation deck. "Father, may I share something with our hosts?" The Emperor looked surprised, but nodded permission. "Your Imperial Majesty," she said, addressing Commander Chan, "my father doesn't know this, but I've been in contact with your community for several months, ever since you arrived. I've been watching your progress, learning about your philosophy, and I've come to believe that you represent something the galaxy desperately needs." She turned to face her father. "You created the most magnificent collection of beautiful things in known space, but in doing so, you isolated them from each other and from the rest of the galaxy. Each specimen exists in perfect preservation, but they can't interact, can't grow, can't contribute to anything larger than themselves." The Emperor's expression showed shock at his daughter's revelation, but he didn't interrupt. "What Haven's Rest has created is the opposite of that," Princess Lorelei continued. Instead of collecting perfection, they've cultivated collaboration. Instead of preserving individual beauty, they've created communal harmony. And the result is something more magnificent than any collection could ever be. Commander Chen watched this family dynamic with interest before addressing the Emperor directly. Your Imperial Majesty, what would you say if I told you that every being in our community was, in some way, a reject from the broader galaxy? Every one of us was considered flawed, broken, or insufficient by the standards of the major powers. The Emperor considered this. I would say that the galaxy's loss was your gain. What I witnessed today proves that conventional standards of value are inadequate. And yet, Torek said gently, those standards are still used throughout the galaxy to determine worth, to assign value, to decide who deserves respect and who deserves rejection. How many great dragons might have survived if they had not been judged by their scars? How many communities like Haven's Rest might exist if beings were not forced to hide their imperfections? The weight of this realization settled on the Emperor like a physical burden. He moved to one of the observation windows and stared out at the planet below, where lights marked the location of the ground-based settlements that made up part of the Haven's Rest community. You're suggesting, he said slowly, that my entire philosophy, the foundation of my empire's aesthetic and social values, has been fundamentally flawed? Not flawed, Jake said carefully. Incomplete. Beauty and perfection have value, but they're not the only values that matter. And sometimes the most beautiful things come from imperfect components working together. The Emperor turned back to the group, and Jake could see that something fundamental had shifted in his thinking. If what you say is true, then I have spent 3 millennia creating a collection of beautiful prisoners rather than fostering beautiful cooperation. It's not too late to change that, Commander Chun said gently. The galaxy is full of beings who have been rejected or overlooked because they don't meet conventional standards of perfection. Imagine what could be accomplished if they had places to go, communities that valued their contributions rather than their appearance. Princess Lyralii stepped closer to her father. Imagine what the Empire could become if it fostered communities like Haven's Rest instead of simply collecting beautiful things. The Emperor looked at his daughter with new eyes, as if seeing her clearly for the first time. You've been planning this, haven't you? The contact with this community, your presence here today. You've been working to change my perspective. Yes, she admitted, because I love you, and because I believe the Empire can be better than it is. But also because I've seen what happens when beings are judged solely on their appearance or their conformity to arbitrary standards. There was a long pause as the Emperor processed this revelation. When he spoke again, his voice carried a weight of emotion that Jake had never heard before. You're talking about yourself, aren't you? About the genetic condition that I decided was an imperfection to be hidden. Princess Lyralii nodded, tears visible in her eyes. I've spent my entire life in the palace, hidden away because my existence doesn't fit the image of imperial perfection. But watching these people, learning about their community, I've realized that my differences aren't flaws to be ashamed of. They're part of